Well, it's bonus episode time. Hey, everybody, we're back. We're going to do a short episode today, and you may notice something different about me. I've got this microphone in front of me. I've had it in front of me the whole time for the entire study, but it's been off camera. Just makes things a little cleaner and easier. But it's really close to my mouth today because it's a warm day as I'm recording this. I got the window open. If somebody goes by, it might be noisy. And if I keep it close by, I can turn the level down a little bit and we'll get rid of the outside noises while keeping me calm and cool while we go through this episode together. So let's take a look at it. We're going to be talking just for a few minutes today about the numbers in the Bible, because as we've gone through the book of Revelation, we've seen a whole lot about numbers and about their meaning and so on. So let's take a look at what numbers have to do with Scripture. Throughout the Bible, numbers have special meaning. And there are a couple reasons for that. First of all, there's a pattern to the numbers and what they mean that has been held by the Jewish people for thousands of years. So there are some people who are hyper involved in what's called numerology. And you want to stay away from that. Taking away the plain meaning so that you can divide everything into numbers and find a secret code is not scriptural, it's not biblical, it's not necessary. But it's also incorrect to deny that the Jewish people and the Hebrew language are strongly connected to numbers, and that these numbers have a meaning, and it's not a number system we came up with in modern times. It is tied back to the Jewish people and to the way Hebrew is written, and then also for the New Testament to the way Greek is written. So we're not making it up, but we're not going to, but we can't underemphasize it. We can't overemphasize it. We want to try to take a healthy look at it. And what it comes down to a lot of degrees is this: each letter of the Hebrew and Greek alphabets equals certain numbers. So in English, it's not that way. We talked about this a little before. The closest English equivalent would be if you had a code where 1 stood for A and 2 stood for B and C stood for 3 and so on. That's not the way we do it in English. But in Greek and in Hebrew, there are direct number connections. Again, don't get over hyper about it. Don't start breaking down every name into its numerical code. The plain meaning is the main meaning, but there are numbers mentioned. And when numbers are mentioned, we need to pay attention to them. And let me get my big head out of the way here again. But I'm going to need to keep myself way down in the corner here because we're going to take up a lot of the screen as we take a look at this today. Many names and words in both Hebrew and Greek language also have significance according to their numerical value. Again, don't overthink this, don't overhype this, but pay proper attention to it. So here's what we're going to do. This is our Revelation bonus today. Let's take a look at numbers in the Bible and what they mean. Let's start with the number, with the meaning, and then we'll show you the examples as we go through. And boy, I got to get myself completely out of the way. There I am, tiny little head in the corner, but that's okay. That's about all you need to see of me. As long as you can hear me, I guess that'll be okay. Let's take a look at them one at a time then. First of all, starting with number 1. What does the number 1 mean in Scripture? Typically, let me see if I can get this properly organized here. There we go. The number 1 means unity, singularity, unity without any division at all and with no differences at all. Some examples of that, the primary example of that is that there's only one God. So God is a single God. Yes, Trinity, we'll see that in a moment, but there is one God. We serve him only. So he's the ultimate example of singleness and singularity in Scripture. The number 2 is usually used to show differences or contrasts, relationships and interdependence. When we see the number 2, that's usually what it means. Examples of that are Adam and Eve and David and Jonathan, right? Marriage. So the number 2 usually has to do with two things that go together but are separate from each other. The number 3, when the number 3 is used, here's one of the first numbers that we see a lot in Revelation and that have a higher symbolic meaning. 1 and 2, while they have some meanings, don't tend to have a lot of meaning in Scripture. That we don't go there a lot, but 3 is one of the big numbers that comes up a lot in Scripture. 3 is the number of divine perfection or completeness. And the ultimate example of that, of course, is the Trinity. God is a single God, but he exists in 3 persons. And so when the number 3 is specifically used in Scripture, it often points back to that. Another example of that is holy, 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 or woe, 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 as we saw in Revelation, right? When something is repeated 3 times, it's a completeness and a perfection to whatever it is repeated 3 times. Another number is 4, and 4 is a number that's usually used to symbolize God's creative works and humanity, but specifically humanity without God, human weakness, not necessarily humanity against God, but humanity as differentiated from God. So, some examples of that, you're going to see examples of human government. The 4 sides of the city, for instance, okay, will be one of those kinds of things. Another number that's used, although not as frequently, is the number 5. 5 is typically symbolic of redemption and grace, and it comes from the idea of God's number 1 plus mankind's number 4 coming together for redemption and grace. So far of this entire screen you're looking at, the only number that's really used an awful lot is the number 3 until now we get to number 6. So on this entire page, 3 and 6 are the main ones to pay attention to. The other ones aren't used very often. 3 and 6 are used a lot. 6 means humanity without God. That's usually where it comes from. And we see it because humans, for instance, were created on the 6th day. So 6 becomes the number for humanity. But humanity acting on our own typically is when we see it. And of course, we'll get to 666 at the end of this as well, where we'll see this multiplied in many ways. So if you want to take a screenshot of 1 through 6, go ahead and do that now, because we're going to move from 1 through 6 to number 7. And just to fit it, we're going to have to go to another screen for that. Okay. So we move from there now to number 7. So far, 3 and 6 are big numbers. 7 is now a huge number in Scripture. It is often referred to as God's favorite number. It stands for spiritual perfection and completeness. Examples of that are Sabbath is the 7th day. There were 7 candlesticks in Revelation, 7 stars, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. It was written to 7 churches, right? 7 is all over the place in Revelation and all over the place in the Bible, starting with the 7 days, the 6 days of creation and the 7th day in which God rested, which he called Sabbath. So 7 is a huge number in Scripture. When we see 7 mentioned specifically, it almost and always means something designed and ordained by God in a complete manner, like the end of a counting sequence. Number 8 is not as commonly used. So far, 3, 6, and 7 are big numbers. 8, not quite as big, but it does have a meaning. It typically means abundance, the idea of 7 plus God's number 1, but it's not used a lot. 9 is another number. It's often used as the conclusion of a matter of finality and judgment. It is God's number 3 times God's number 3 equaling 9. Again, not a number that is used an awful lot in Scripture, so it's not a big one to really be thinking about. 10 is something that's used a lot more often. So 3, 6, 7, and now 10 would be in some of those major numbers in Scripture. 10 means ordinal perfection. That is the order of things, the way we count things. And it comes basically because we got 10 fingers, we got 10 toes. But in the Bible, we see it in the 10 commandments. We see it in the 10 plagues on Egypt. It is that completion number when God interacts with human beings. 12, again, is another really big number in Scripture. We saw it a lot in Revelation, didn't we? Yeah, we see it a lot through the Bible. It means governmental completeness. It typically is an indication of God and mankind in unity. God's number being 3, mankind's number being 4. 3 times 4 is 12. So 3 times 4, we've got the 12 tribes. We've got 12 disciples. We've got 12. How many different ways did 12 factor into the description of the New Jerusalem, right? 12 times 12 equals 144, 144,000, right? This number 12 appears over and over and over and over in Scripture. It is the main way that numbers are used to show God and mankind in unity acting together. 12 tribes and 12 disciples being the main way that we see that in Scripture. So 3, 6, 7, 10, and 12 so far are our biggest numbers that we're going to see. And now we're going to see some other bigger numbers as well. 24, a number that was repeated a lot in the book of Revelation. It is simply an upgraded or more complete form of 12. For instance, the 24 elders, which were the 12 representing the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles. So when you see 24, it's usually two groups of 12, and it usually symbolizes a joining of the Old Testament saints with the New Testament saints, the Old Testament with the New, the Hebrew Bible with the Christian Bible, the Jews with the Gentile Christians. That's usually where 24 comes from. 40, of course, is a huge number all the way through scriptures. So many things are done in 40s. Why? 40 is typically a period of probation or a period of holding back or working out of judgment. Noah's flood lasted for 40 days. Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus' temptation was for 40 days. And all of these are delays or sabbaticals where there's a waiting period before something big happens, right? Noah's flood before the creation of the world came again, or the recreation of the world after the flood. Israel in the wilderness before they could come into the promised land. Jesus tempted before he goes into his full area of ministry. 40 days tends to be this a major waiting period in scripture. So when you see a 40 in scripture, think about that. Think about this period of probation or of sabbatical or of waiting on God before God brings a big event. When you see a 40 in scripture, there's usually a really big event or a big series of events that follows it. So that's what 40 indicates. 42 is another big number in scripture, especially in the book of Revelation. It is the number that is typically connected with the Antichrist. And we saw, for instance, the tribulation is 2 periods of 42 months. And remember, we even saw it referred to as 42 months several times, also as a time, times, and half a time, also as the number of days, right? We saw all those different ways. Why 42? It is 6, humans' number, times 7, God's number. It is sinful humanity trying to be God. That's the best we can recollect of why 42 seems to matter in that way. It almost always is connected with an antichrist type of number, an attempt by Satan to look like Jesus and to copy Jesus, but falling far short of that. That's where 42 almost always is referred to in scripture. And then the final number that we'll look at, the big 666 that we saw in Revelation already, it is a concentrated expression of evil. 3, God's perfect number, times 6, our number in rebellion against God, 3 sixes, 6 and 6 and 6. It is divine imperfection, just like 3 is a symbol of divine perfection, and 6 is a symbol of imperfection or rebellion against God. It's a perfect imperfection. It's spiritual imperfection. It is Satan trying to look like God. So God says, I'm going to seal the foreheads. Well, I'm going to seal the foreheads of my followers. Every time God does something, Satan tries to duplicate it and fails and doesn't do it well. And 666, his number, is the ultimate example of that. So I know that's a short one. That's a quick one. Go ahead and take screenshots of all 3 of those. If you need to go back and do that, you can do so. But that gives you an idea. As you can see, about half of those numbers have real significance. 3, 6, 7, 12, 24, 40, and 666 are big, big numbers. The other ones, they matter not quite as often. We don't see them as many times, but they have some significance as well. But again, let me finish off by saying this. Don't pay too much attention to the numbers. Don't believe conspiracy theorists who try to spell some current world leader's name out according to numbers. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work in English that way. It doesn't work in the English language that way. And if you've got to take somebody's name today, convert it to Greek or Hebrew, convert it into numbers, and add or multiply those numbers to come up with 666, that is way too many steps. God will make things much more evident than that. This is the way conspiracy theorists try to scare us into either buying their product or following their ideas. So, do numbers matter in scripture? Yes. Should we pay a lot of attention to it and try to convert everything into numbers? No. Give it the amount of attention it deserves, and the amount of attention it deserves mostly is when a number comes up in a way that shows that this number matters, then refer to the chart and go, why does this number matter? And that's it. If there's no number in the sentence, just take the sentence for what it means. The main meaning is the plain meaning, and the plain meaning is the main meaning. But on the numbers, that's how they kind of play out. So you have the tools to be able to go forward with it. I hope that was a benefit to you. We're going to add one more bonus episode, probably even shorter than this, where we'll show you a couple timelines just so you have that, because I know a lot of folks like to put Revelation into timeline. I'm not a fan of it, but let's put a couple up for you. So we'll do that next week for you. We'll see you then.